Okay, it is right at 2:02. So I am going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the fall kickoff meeting for the League of Women Voters Austin area. We really appreciate you joining us on this lovely Sunday afternoon where it's certainly hard to stay indoors. So we appreciate all of you for attending our meeting today. Let's look at a little bit of besides the welcome, 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 what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to give a year overview for the League of Women Voters Austin area, and then we are very excited to present our panel discussion, which is Democracy in the Spotlight, led by Cindy Weatherby and some wonderful panelists who are really going to go in depth as to what happened relating to voting rights in the last few, I'm going to say few, legislative sessions, the full one, and then the subsequent special sessions that have been called. We'll conclude the meeting portion at around 3:55, and then we will go straight into our voter registration course and conclude that around 5 p.m. We're again lucky to have Bruce Elephant here today to help us with the Q&A portion of that. The training itself will be a video and it'll take around, I believe, 27 minutes to complete. I would love to see as many of you stay on and get that VDR certification to help us register folks to vote in the upcoming elections. If you have not been registered in the last few months, your registration has probably expired. So if you want to hang around and renew that, we would love to have you. So thank you to start out with, a really big thank you to our co-sponsor of this event, the League of Women Voters of Texas. We are thrilled that they believed in this program and joined us to help advertise it and produce it and bring all of this information to you. So thank you so much to our Texas chapter for that support. Now, let's get into the meat of the program for the Austin area update. These are going to be your officers for the count this sort of year with the League of Women Voters, which leads through to July. And I am your president for the next year and the year following that. And we have Mariah Powers as the past president, Elisa Sugar for the secretary, and Angie Hardy for the treasurer. At a very high level, I just want to give you some idea of where we are going into this year. I'll give you some basic facts about our operations. Then we're going to go through our 4 basic program areas and talk about what they're doing this year, what's coming up, and really importantly, how you can help. We would love to have folks join us in our mission and have our members participate actively in some of the projects we have going on. So we'll highlight those opportunities for you. A quick note, these slides and this presentation will be available following the meeting. A recording is being made of the presentation itself that will ultimately be available on YouTube when we're done with the editing. And the slide deck itself, we will find a way to email that back out to anyone who wants that. So we will likely do a follow-up email following this meeting to give you access to those materials should you wish them. So for the Austin area, I wanted to give you a general idea of how we budget and what our budget looks like. Annually, we're spending about $124,000 this year. That's fairly typical. We tend to bring in about that much revenue as well. So it generally balances out plus or minus about 5% either way. You can see there that our largest expense is the voter's guide. That has to do with translation services and publication. And obviously, that is one of our very flagship programs, helping to educate voters on how to vote and what the information on the ballot really means to them. So we are excited always to have that project, and it is our primary cost as we go through the year. The other costs there are national and state memberships and support. That symbiotic relationship is very helpful for our local chapter. These groups really do support our mission and enable us to do lots of things like this program. You'll see later on related to Club Express and some of our other membership and website updates, how we're working together to make that happen. The only other really large expenses that we have are our office space and really putting together meetings for our membership. Luckily, we also have revenue beyond that. In our savings, we have about $280,000 in revenue that's sitting there for future projects or emergency funds. So with that being said, let's go into our 4 areas of work and organization within the league. The first is organization, led by Debbie Voss. She's the vice president in that area. And that group is really responsible for the underlying administration of the work you see. They handle things like membership, they handle volunteer services, fundraising, event organization, and then the day-to-day operations like answering the phone and answering the mail and all of those things that really have to happen to allow the league to run successfully. So membership wise, Joyce Jackson is our director for this year. And here are our numbers. This is really a high watermark for our chapter. We're at 642 members, the vast majority of which are individual members. You can see those numbers here. 220 of those being sustaining. So a little over a third are individual sustaining memberships. And that's really where a large portion of our revenue comes from. We also, of course, have household memberships, student memberships, and a handful of life members. But we're very excited about these numbers, and we really want to continue to grow these members, as well as find a way to make membership meaningful for all 642 of these members, and help them contribute and get out of the league the resources that they need and the ability to make a difference in our area. The other area I want to touch on under organization is development. Obviously, the things that we do cost money. We are an all volunteer board, so we really don't spend money on things like staffing and things like that, but we still do need dollars to make our projects go. Amy Wilson is the director in this area, and we do have a couple of upcoming fundraising and development events. We will be participating in Amplify Austin. That date has yet to be announced. It's traditionally in March. So be watching for that in March of 2022. And then we are very excited about our Celebrating Democracy dinner. We are currently scheduled for April 2022. We obviously have not been able to hold this dinner lately because of the pandemic, but we are very optimistic that we will be able to all be back in person in April of 2022 and have our signature gala fundraising event. So we look forward to seeing all of you there. You're going to see this slide 4 times today, the How Can I Help slide, and I've done one for each of the organizational areas that we have. For this group, for organization, they really are looking for assistance with grant researchers and writers, people who can help with corporate sponsorships. It would be wonderful if we could have consistent sponsorships for some of our big ticket items like the guide. Fundraising, partnering up with folks to help raise money during Amplify Austin, and then obviously assist with the gala. So with these, as well as any of the future events that you're going to see me or opportunities that you're going to see me discuss, if you want to join us for that, you can do one of 2 things. You can look on the volunteer opportunities page at the League of Women Voters Austin area website, or you can contact us at volunteer@lwvaustin.org. So please reach out. We would love to have you. The next area that I'd like to go over is communications, and they help support this meeting today. The vice president of that area is Mubaraka, and we are thrilled to have her. She's doing a wonderful job. And our big announcement here is that we are moving to Club Express. The league at the Texas level has really helped us, as well as the US level, to make this transition. We believe that this new program that we're going to institute to help manage both our website and membership and ultimately volunteer opportunities is going to make a large difference in how well we can communicate and interact with all of our members. Now, the website is going to remain the same, so you don't need to worry about that. But you will ultimately have a login for your membership, and it will allow you to go in and add details like areas of interest that you're interested in volunteering in. It will allow you to renew your membership. It will allow you to see all the events that are coming up and track things. There's going to be all kinds of exciting functionality that is going to come out of this website and this new program. And we really look forward to sharing that with you. The rollout is currently set for just a few days from now, September 30th. So you should be seeing these changes very, very soon. In addition to Club Express, there are other ways beyond just the website to interact with us. You can find the League of Women Voters Austin area on any of the traditional social media platforms: Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. And we really do make a significant effort to try to keep these updated with the freshest and newest information about the Austin Area League. So we really encourage you to follow us and find us on these platforms so you can get the most up-to-date information. We also need help in this area. We would love to have somebody assist with email marketing, really optimizing our reach to our membership with email. Social media manager, you saw all the ways that we're trying to reach out, and obviously that requires a lot of coordination. So if you're an expert with Facebook or you're an expert with LinkedIn, we would love to hear from you. Just in general, public relations, we could use some help. And finally, there is a lot of technology involved with running the Austin Area League, from the Club Express program to this program itself to Zoom to the database to all the things. We would love to have somebody who is interested in technology lead those efforts. It's all pretty straightforward and user friendly when you get to the base of it. So if you have experience in those areas and you'd like to help contribute, please reach out. Let's talk about voter services, right? That is the primary substantive area that we are known for here at the League. And so that is headed up by Pam Bixby. Pam and her group have a huge area that they cover, and you can see here this overview, but it's really just an enormous amount of work, from the voter's guide to Vote 411, and they do quite a bit of work to really get that registration and education part of our mission implemented around this area. Specifically, voter registration and turnout is led by Valerie DeVille. She is the one who is out there every weekend or so, helping to coordinate efforts to register voters, be it at farmers markets or the Alamo Draft House or all those different places. So you're going to see her out there beating the sidewalks, and we're lucky to have her. They also do informational presentations and special events, and they do get out the vote drives when we get closer to elections. And this includes helping people get information on how to register, things like hanging tags on the door on how to get a mail-in ballot if you need one, or where to go to register, or what the issues are. And we just want to remind you that National Voter Registration Day is coming up really soon. It's September 28th, and the deadline to register for the next election is going to be October 1st. Valerie's email is there. If you'd like to reach out to her, please do. Voter's Guide. We've already touched on this a little, but we produce at least a couple of issues of the Voter's Guide every year, and it covers all of the elections that happen in the Austin area. So it's going to include things like bonds, candidates. For those of you who have never actually looked at the guide, I really encourage you to do so. It's exceptionally informative, and it really gives voters the ability to see information about what they're going to see on that ballot, and information about the candidates in their own words before they go to the polling place. So this is something that we're really proud of here at the League, and Gretchen does such a great job running it, but it takes a massive team of folks to put all that together. Beyond that, we also have that same sort of information on Vote 411, with the coordinator being Jackie Collins on that, who does a great job. We really do put a lot of content on that platform as well to help people understand where to go to vote, how to do that, and all of that information. We are especially proud of the fact that we have been able to add 2 additional languages for the voter's guide. So beyond just English and Spanish, we have recently been able to translate the guide into Vietnamese and Chinese, one of the dialects, as well. And we hope to be able to continue to do that far reaching into the future. It really depends on how fast the information about the ballots come out. We're optimistic right now that we'll be able to still hit all 4 languages, but we'll have to watch that and see when we finally get the information related to the races really due to redistricting, right? We all know that's going on. And so the candidates have availability based on those decisions being made. So we'll do the best we can, and we're hoping to keep all 4 languages. Of note, this upcoming November ballot, the the voter's guide for that is going to be online. We're not going to print hard copies for that this year, but when we do go into the primaries in the spring, we will have hard copies for that again. First Vote is another area that we support in voter services. This one is really focused on high school kids, helping them learn what it means to vote, how to vote, what all of those processes and information that they would otherwise not have, what those are. And we reach out and work with the schools in Travis and all the contiguous counties to make all of this happen. And we really want to inspire students to vote and get involved at a local level. Finally, we have candidate forums led by Carol Eppelkamp. She is the chair on that. And I should have also mentioned Grace Thomas as the chair on First Vote. Carol leads a team that helps generate questions for city council candidates, and coordinating through the City of Austin Ethics Commission for the Austin races, but we've also been involved in races in contiguous counties and cities in the area as well. So we are thinking that the next forums are going to be in the 2022 midterm elections. So look forward to that. And again, with the others, we've got ability to help in this area as well. We would love to have an assistant editor for the Voter's Guide. If you have editing experience, we would love to have you join us for this. Always, always, we need volunteers to help register voters and participate in the Get Out the Vote effort. There is actually a standard Google form for that. There is a link that is on this slide that you will be able to access from this deck. You can also just flat out go to our website, go under volunteer opportunities and access this same information. We're still also looking for folks to help us do online training sessions for the First Vote project. And finally, if you'd like to be a moderator for one of our candidate forums or are interested in taking a leadership role in that, we would love to hear from you on that as well. Finally, our 4th area is community relations, led by Yvonne Davis as the vice president. We've got 2 superstars who work as directors for us in this area, the first of which is Jessica Foreman. She is looking at planning a couple of programs for the remainder of the year. First would be a fall program, kind of looking at what some of these state laws that have been passed recently mean for Austin, especially in the area of local control. And then maybe a winter program looking at citizen ballot initiatives, how those work, how other cities handled them. Finally, we have policy statements, position statements that we take on behalf of our membership that get voted on at our annual meeting. And there is a process for developing these position statements, and they're obviously done on a cycle. So right now, we're currently looking at administration of justice and defending the environment. So leading straight into educational resources, which is led by Jennifer Delk. Jen has put together a really fabulous set of resources for use by you or anyone in the community to really help folks learn about the civics that are involved in day-to-day life here in our area. And you can see here that there are 14 different sessions that she has put together to really walk folks through how all these things work, to understand the government that is in place here. So these are great resources. If you're curious about any of this, or you know a group who could really, benefit from this type of educational resource, these are there for your use. They are on our website. If you click on these links with these slides, they'll take you straight there. And this is such an outstanding project that was put together. We're very proud of it. Finally, back to how can I help? As I was saying, going straight into that, we'd love to have you join one of the committees that helps develop position statements. And for those who have experience in educational instruction design, we would love to get your assistance with development of those educational videos and materials that you saw on a prior slide. So with that all said, I am going to take a breath and ask if there are any questions related to any of this, or if there's anything that has come through the chat box that anyone would like to discuss at this point. And in about 5 minutes, we'll be turning it over to Cindy Weatherby and for her wonderful panel. So Katie, has anything come in on the question or the chat?
None at this time.
Okay. Well, I guess I went a little fast for everybody. With that being said, I think one just came in. And the question is, are these opportunities available for leagues outside of Austin, for example, the Hill Country League? What I am actually showing you is only the volunteer opportunities available for Austin. So we serve the Austin area, truthfully. And so we are serving not only Austin, but all the contiguous counties. So if you are interested, I know, for example, in the things that Valerie are looking to do for the voter and registration, we are specifically focusing this next year outside of Travis County. Travis County is one of the most registered to vote counties in the state, and we really think that there is opportunity for growth more in those contiguous counties. So for those types of opportunities, if you're looking to focus on areas that are not necessarily Austin, we would love to have you. So for Get Out the Vote or voter registration, if you're a VDR, you do not have to be a member of the Austin League to help us with those voter outreach projects. We also, as I mentioned, do quite a few candidate forums, or we are available to you for any of the Austin area counties. So if you're interested in participating in that, we would also be interested in speaking with you. However, that is something that is limited to those who are members of the Austin Area League. I hope that that answers that question. Please feel free to let me know if not. And a chat has come in from Leah. Hi, Leah. Thank you so much for joining us today. Leah does a lot of work on the position statements, and she is pointing out to me that we are also looking at possibly doing a position statement on education, or actually updating the position statement that we already have. So if that is an area of interest for you, or you feel like you've got, a lot of information about that, we are really looking for folks who have expertise in those areas to help us gain the information we need to make an informed policy statement. Thank you, Leah, for pointing that out. I really appreciate that. I am not sure if we have any other Q&A at this time. Katie, do you see anything else?
Not at this.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead then and take a moment to chat a little bit about the things that I am hoping to focus on in my upcoming presidency. And then in the next 2 minutes, I will do a switch over to Cindy Weatherby so she can kick off our wonderful panel. One of the things that we at the Austin area are really taking a hard look at, and I think you probably have heard about it from the US League level and the Texas League level, is how to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion principles into what we are doing here at the League of Women Voters Austin area. And honestly, for me, we are looking at how to, in the most pragmatic way, institute real decisions and policy considerations that will make a difference in how we can provide services. So from something as mundane as where we hold our meetings, right? We want to make sure that when we're back to meeting in person, we're meeting in a place that everyone can get to, that it doesn't require you to drive out to far west Travis County to meet. We need to be close to public transit. We need to make meetings at a time that everyone can attend, regardless of whether you work or you have kids in school, or what the demands on your time are. And so that's just one very mundane example of how we're looking to do that. Another great part of that has been brought up with Valerie's group about looking at where our services are really needed for registration, and where we really need to be inclusive to try to get some of this information out. You can see that also and the voter's guide, and the way that we're trying to include even more languages to bring people in to encourage that education across our area, regardless of language or availability to meet in a certain place or things like that. So we're going to be working pretty strongly in that area. If you've got ideas or thoughts on that, we would certainly love to hear it. So since we had a few extra moments, I just took the time to go ahead and highlight those things that we are working on. So with that being said, and I don't see any other Q&A or chat coming through, I am going to go ahead and go back and to the slide deck and say again, thank you to everyone for attending this first portion of the update. Thank you for the League of Women Voters Texas area for being our co-sponsor. And I am excited now to turn it over to Cindy Weatherby to present. I'm glad I'm done speaking, Cindy. I I feel like I'm out of words. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to present the panel presentation, Democracy in the Spotlight.
Thank you very much, Mary, for all that you've presented today. I can see that the local league is in good hands and really appreciate your leadership. I am Cindy Weatherby, and since 2015, I've volunteered as the League of Women Voters of Texas Chair of the Voting Rights and Election Law Advocacy, and I'm extremely honored to moderate this extraordinary panel to help us all get multiple perspectives on a most extraordinary year in the legislature. Also, extra thanks to the League of Women Voters of Austin and League of Women Voters of Texas President Grace Shemaine for this opportunity. League of Women Voters of Austin always plays a big role in the legislative advocacy given its location, and so do neighbor local leagues in Hays County, Comal, Hill Country too. And this year, local leagues all across the state have as well, all 34 local leagues, as we've had almost 250,000 individual contacts to the legislature by our members and our associates that use our platform. If you'll go to the next slide. Our time is really short, and I know that this presentation is going to zoom through really quickly in the next hour. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of who you're going to be honored to listen to today. Our first panelist is going to talk about the historical perspective of this very unusual legislative session, the 87th session of the Texas legislature this year in 2021. Harvey Kronberg is the publisher of the Quorum Report. It was a pioneer of online political publishing, and he has reported on the Texas legislature since 1989. QR is the oldest political insiders newsletter, and as you see here, he is widely respected and revered, and we're very honored to have him here today. Next, we're going to hear from one of the stars of the legislature for voting and election law, and that is John Busey. John is the state representative for District 136, elected in 2018, and since that time has served on the House Elections Committee. He works on behalf of voters and has been extremely successful in working across the aisle to make improvements to our voting election code. We're also very honored to have Isabel Longoria, who is Harris County's first elections administrator. She's in that role responsible for both voter registration and elections administration, and has the honor and experience of creating creative solutions addressing pandemic-related barriers in 2020 and beyond. If you've watched any of the online Texas legislature online public hearings that the Senate or the House had on major elections bills, you've seen Ms. Longoria ably presenting the information about how Harris County took care of its voters. And then lastly, we're very honored to have Thomas Buser Clancy. Tommy is an ACLU senior staff attorney, and you may not know that name, but you certainly do know his work. He's very active in a new lawsuit challenging Senate Bill 1 in this second legislative special session on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Texas and the community of those with disabilities through Rev Up Texas and other organizations. He was also involved in that lawsuit settlement that ended the Texas Secretary of State purge of nearly 100,000 voters in 2019. So we're very happy to have each of them cover their perspectives on the regular 87th session and also the 3 so far special sessions. And I'll ask Mr. Kronberg to begin with putting the 87th session into historical perspective. We're going to hold questions for a general Q&A at the end. So, Mr. Kronberg.
Thank you very much for having me. I presume everybody can hear me just fine. In 15 minutes, I'm going to try and give you a context for what has happened in this last session, or this last series of sessions, frankly. First of all, you need to know that that since the Republican takeover of the state, the Republican perception of their constituency has been essentially complete reliance on 7 suburban counties. That's like Hayes, Williamson, Fort Bend, Montgomery. Tarrant is kind of the outlier there, but Collin County. These counties have been so Republican that from the perspective of any campaign, they didn't even do micro-targeting. They would just do saturation bombing of advertising, block walking, et cetera. And at least as far as statewide races were concerned, they would presume that they were going to get 70% turnout and 70% would vote Republican. Add to that the reliably Republican rurals, and that has been kind of the cornerstone of state public policy for the last 20 years. But to put that into context, we're a state now of 30 million people, but because of the disorganization of the Democrats, B, the funding advantage of the Republicans, the only election that has mattered for the most part in the last 20 years has been the Republican primary. So we're in a state of 30 million people. Typically, you might get a turnout of 1.5, maybe we're growing a little bit, 1.7 million Republican primary voters, which another way of saying that is about 850,000 individual voters have control over state policy, over state elections. So about 850,000 in a state of 30 million control the levers of power. And as a result, obviously, they've controlled redistricting, et cetera. The world is changing somewhat. In the last couple of elections, we saw, well, in the 2018 election, we saw essentially a Democratic sweep in some of these rock-ribbed Republican counties. And so now all of a sudden, what the once reliable formula for Republicans has come into question, and we're going to see some pretty creative map drawing in this next redistricting cycle as they try and hold on to their majorities, create super majorities, but they're going to have tendrils going into rural, from the suburbs into rural Texas. And it's not at all reliable. Typically, in a redistricting cycle, we expect it to be about 3 or 4 election cycles before the minority party starts to win or increase its numbers because of the changing demographics of the state and the rightward tilt of the Republican Party in this last election cycle. It would not surprise me to see that's accelerated going forward. The things you need to know are that pretty much every session is dominated by the big 3, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker. The Governor Abbott, followed Governor Perry. And I'm not being partisan to say that he has not demonstrated a big vision for where to take Texas. Unlike Governor Perry, who at one time endorsed the Trans-Texas Corridor and had some big vision the Texas Enterprise Fund. Governor Perry built a what some call an economic development machine. That has not been the primary focus of Governor Abbott. In fact, his biggest initiative in his first legislative session was pre-K, creating and funding pre-K. He got so much pushback from the Republican primary voters who called it babysitting, nanny state, social brainwashing, that although he passed it, they did not fund it particularly with a sufficient amount of money. And ever since then, he's been somewhat risk averse about being challenged on the right. He's a fundraising machine, however, sitting with $50 million in the bank. And while not particularly popular in the House or Senate, because he's funded primaries against Republicans, he's vetoed their budget. The $50 million is pretty persuasive when everything is said and done. But he has, for most of his term of office, been more worried about being pursued by Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor, who has unchallenged conservative credentials. Now, when I say conservative credentials, conservative 10 years ago meant pro-business and socially conservative. But the business community has essentially been under assault by the populist wing of the Republican Party and is somewhat mystified about how to deal with it. The big tech companies are the social platforms, social engagement platforms are under attack. They're being accused of being biased, et cetera. Essentially, most of the last couple of sessions have been more focused on socially conservative issues. He was the author, champion, and a major promoter of the bathroom bill, which actually was a seismic moment in Texas politics. The bathroom bill, as you may recall, every session has something that it becomes a metaphor for that session. Nobody remembers what happened in the 2017 session, except that there was this bathroom bill. It started out with about a 65% approval and ended up with about a 65% disapproval as people found out more and more about it. And it became an embarrassment, frankly, for the Republican Party, which ultimately led to surprise gain of, I can't remember if it was 8 or 9 Democrats in the 2018 election. Most of those victories were not anticipated. They were not predicated on any kind of polling. In fact, in some cases, the Democratic challengers didn't even really work. They just happened to be there when the opportunity came along. Governor Patrick has rules with each passing session. He has increased his control over the Senate. He did that partially by well, we call it busting a chairman. Senator Kel Seliger, a once powerful senator from Amarillo, was insulted by one of Patrick's staffers. He returned the insult, and the lieutenant governor, then removed him from significant chairmanships and committee assignments. That would never have happened before Patrick. Prior to Patrick, the senators ran the Senate, and the lieutenant governor presided with the permission of the senators. And in fact, David Dewhurst at one point was actually taken out of the chair by the senators very quietly and surgically. And I think it stunned pretty much everybody in the community, not to mention the senators themselves, that they didn't revolt, have an open revolt, and essentially fight back on that. And since that point, the Senate has been docile, which is not something that we normally associate with the Texas Senate. The Republicans pretty much fall in line. He is constantly doing polling and showing them that if they don't vote the way he wants them to vote on a specific issue, that their primary voters won't like it. And it has proven to be very persuasive, that along with the power to punish by removing you from significant committees and committee assignments. The speaker, but for the moment, the lieutenant governor has been the primary driver of the process. The speaker, we go back to Joe Strauss, who served 5 terms as speaker. He was an accidental speaker. He was the product of a Republican chairman's revolt that was supported by a broad majority of Democrats. But it was the Republican chairman who did not like the way Tom Craddock was running the House that authored and engineered the revolt. Strauss is somewhat, well, he's somewhat of an aristocrat. He can keep all of this stuff at arm's length. He was personally assaulted. He's the first Jewish speaker in 140 years. And that's not particularly a popular place to be in the Republican primary. But what he was notable for was simply ignoring Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick when it suited his purposes. And he's the one who essentially put the kibosh on the bathroom bill, saying he was not going to be responsible for a single suicide of a single transgender because of some kind of legislation. He finished his 5th term and decided it was time to move on. But he had somewhat restored the culture of the House where the members ran the House. There was a sense of collegiality. The partisan warfare was, I won't say it's always going to be there, but it was diminished fairly dramatically. The trains ran on time. His big problem was that he was most comfortable with folks elected prior to 2012 to be his leadership team. And when we had a subsequent speakers race, one of the themes was to empower those folks that were elected post 2012. So you have, as a result, Dennis Bonnen, who had been there for 24 years, unfortunately had an unfortunate mishap in terms of giving an interview with somebody that frankly nobody in the process trusts. It's amazing that he had what he thought was an off-the-record interview and identified 10 Republicans, or his associate identified 10 Republicans they were happy to eliminate. And some of the old guard came and said they could no longer support him and essentially drove him from office. We now have Speaker Dade Phelan, a freshman who has had a number of opportunities to take control of the session. Thus far has not demonstrated that. He has been reasonably fair with Democrats, not locking the doors when they decided to bust the quorum. But when the governor vetoed Article 10, which is the funding of the legislature, and in my opinion, an assault on the separation of powers, and it was done somewhat gratuitously and whimsically, frankly. He wanted to do it 2 years ago when he had everything that he wanted. There was an opportunity for Speaker Phelan to say, well, this is all these items on the call are very interesting, but we're not doing anything until we pass and sign the funding authorization again. And the speaker actually told me that he did not believe the governor would do that, would sign it. And my argument back was, well, that actually makes you even more powerful because you're the one now controlling the agenda. Be that as it may, it was a very difficult session for any freshman speaker. We had COVID, we had a freeze, we had all the disruption of the Trump post-presidency, and the domination of former President Trump of the current Republican primary voter. And it's been proven to be a very difficult balancing act. But I'll just sum up by saying the 2017 session was an embarrassment to the legislature. As a result, we had a surprisingly large number of Democrats unanticipated elected in 2018. The 2019 session was a really back to business of government session. But the Democrats had $50 million to spend in the 2020 election and did not move the needle, which eliminated the fear factor for the Republicans. And this socially conservative agenda has now pretty much gone to extremes. And I'll simply end by saying that there's any number of bills that could be flashpoint bills, but at the moment, SB 8, I call it the vigilante bill, where women are suddenly and their healthcare providers are being targeted for legitimate constitutional prerogatives, has broken through in ways that are just now beginning to manifest themselves. And the governor is now at a 33% approval rating. I think Republicans are in some jeopardy, even though they're going to draw the maps. If Republicans lose suburban women, they lose. And we're on the cusp of something like that happening, even though they're going to control redistricting. And with that, I'll pull my horns in and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think that that is a really great overview and gives some of our members who maybe haven't been watching the legislature nearly as long as you have an understanding of where we are. We'll be interested to hear if any of our other panelists have comments on that as well. And I just want to remind everyone that you can put questions in the Q&A. Go down to the Q&A box, and then we're going to take a general Q&A at the end of our session here. Let's go rapidly next to a member of the legislature who lived through this session so far, State Representative John Busey, and webinar controllers, if you would pull up Representative Busey's photo there and put him on the spot here. We really appreciate your time here. I mean, I know you're in the midst of a third special session, and this has been a tremendously impactful one on your life and all the people that you live and work with. And we really appreciate your being here today, and also appreciate your ability to reach across the aisle. And I want to remind everyone, Harvey mentioned he wasn't being partisan in his observations. The League is strenuously nonpartisan. We try our best to do everything we can to serve the voters of Texas and enable them. And I'll turn it over to you, Representative Busey. Been a member of the legislature now for 2 sessions, on the elections committee, both of those sessions. That's not an enviable position, I don't think, that most of your peers have. And we really appreciate your being here today.
Well, Cindy, thanks so much for having me. Harvey, listening to your background, it makes me think of a comedy of errors, kind of, with the way that the Texas legislature works. Not all of it great, but I tell you what, it's an honor to serve in the legislature. 2 terms now. I would love to continue serving. I'm running for re-election. I just find the opportunity to get to be at the heart of policymaking and working with all of you such a impactful and powerful experience. And so thank you all for the opportunity that I've been given. I used to be county party chair in Williamson County, one of these suburban areas that has seen a lot of change that Harvey was talking about. And in that role, you help put on primary elections. You learn the behind the scenes of how elections work. And that's what led me, when I got elected, to ask to be on the elections committee. In fact, I sat down with then Speaker Bonin and I told him, you know, I think a lot of people go in and ask for state affairs and appropriations. And I said, I want to be on elections. And I think at the time, very few people, is usually where people got sent, not where they requested. And so he told me in that meeting that he would make my day. And so I was thrilled to be put on there. I think he used profanity, but I won't use that now. But I think he was excited to have someone that wanted to be in that role and be a part of that process. And I again asked for it this session. I think it's so important. I think at the foundation, and this will kind of lead the conversation as we talk about quorum break and other things, but I think foundationally, protecting voting rights, expanding voting rights, and increasing access to voting rights has to be foundational and has to be the #1 issue. I think I've been asked many times, well, now will you break quorum for any item? And the answer that I've been saying is no. You know, we as Texas Democrats, we've become used to losing battles on policy in the legislature. But what's different about when it comes to voting rights is if you, in our opinion, if you manipulate the system where it's not fair, then all other issues cannot be fair. So if we want to have honest representation in the legislature that reflects the people of Texas, we have to first have foundational protections to voting access and voting rights. And so that's why it's such a priority issue, because it impacts all other issues. I want to start off with the regular session. You know, we did some good this session, and I appreciate you pointing out working across the aisle. I think anyone in this role but also anyone joining this today, if you're going to be an activist, if you're going to be down there advocating for issues, you've got to be able to work across the aisle. You've got to find friends in the Democrat and Republican caucus. You've got to find staffers in those offices to work with. And you can't, I find at least, it's best effective to not hold grudges. So when I have a bill from an author that I don't like, I don't let myself personalize it around that author. And I'm saying all this to talk about my relationship with Senator Hughes, who, carried Senate Bill 7, the bill that led to quorum break, and this voter bill that we fought extensively. But he's also who I worked with to pass House Bill 1382. He was my Senate sponsor. This was the ballot by mail tracker piece of legislation. It's something I filed as a freshman. We didn't really get any movement. I think because the pandemic, certain counties adopted similar policies. People saw it in action, and just think of like any of your packages that you order from Amazon or anywhere else, you can get online and track where it's at. That's kind of what this bill does. It allows you to monitor and track your ballot by mail. We actually went further with some legislation in the special to let you do some corrections on it. But this was something that I worked with Senator Hughes on. And I think it's important to, when you find a good idea, to find bipartisan support for it. And I thank the League of Women Voters who advocated for that piece of legislation. Our election administrators and our clerks came down and advocated for it. And we saw, Republican and Democratic caucus support for it, leadership from the speaker to the lieutenant governor, Senator Hughes, and on up. And it was a piece of legislation that I think was one of the high water marks when it comes to election policy this session. And, and so I think that's just a great example of how we can work together and we can get some stuff done. Just to run through some other good wins, I think this legislative session, Senate Bill 116, we put House Bill 2860 into it, which is just more notification, included notices of election, polling place locations, and other critical information when it deals with local jurisdictions, something we had done the previous session for statewide information and county, but now with local elections, this is just more access to information to help with our shared goals, I think, of increasing access to the ballot box. We saw, I think it's Senate Bill 598 is important for us all to keep on our minds right now. This deals with risk limiting audits. It's a national best practice to ensure integrity of elections. So I think as we're going through this ongoing conversation from the governor's office on down about audits and what we're hearing across the country tied to the 2020 election audits, you should know that we passed a bill already this session that will follow best practices on how to do audits of elections moving forward. So often right now, I think we're seeing partisan politics come into play with these audits, and that's frustrating. And I think takes us backwards. We have this bill in place, Senate Bill 598, to work on that. I think when we look at where kind of things got off the rails this session, we need to first know where we started from, and we started with the Secretary of State's office. Secretary Hughes herself talking about it during the midst of the pandemic and COVID-19, that this election was incredibly successful. It saw the largest turnout in 28 years. That's a win, even though that still leaves Texas way underperforming where we all want us to be as far as civic engagement. We were seeing major progress. We had the Secretary of State's office come to the elections committee hearing and talk about how the elections were run smoothly and securely, and that they were a success. So I think that's the foundation that I started with for this legislative session, thinking, well, if these were so successful, then let's look at how we continue to grow that pattern. Unfortunately, that success and those statements from the Secretary of State were met with what I would classify as voter suppression bills. We had 65 bills filed this session that would make it harder for people to vote. 65 bills filed in Texas. That's more than North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Arizona combined. So you're talking about a major attack on access to voting this legislative session that ultimately culminated with SB 7. Now, it wasn't all a loss. And I think back to the start, we have to continue to work across the aisle, even when we're frustrated. I think when we were looking at the earlier versions of SB 7 in the regular session, the House did that. The Texas House worked in good faith, put on a bunch of amendments the night that the bill was on the House floor. Unfortunately, when that bill came back from the Senate, there were significant changes done in the dark of night final hours that not only changed the bill back from our amendments, but added on new provisions, which received a lot of attention, such as, limiting the hours in Sunday voting, which will be which was a direct attack on souls to the polls. It also had lowered threshold to overturn election results, things that we had never dealt with in hearings or had public testimony on. So we in the House felt we were met in bad faith from the Senate. Part of that is what led to the quorum break, I think, and then what's led to the ongoing quorum break is a lack of trust now between the House and the Senate, and feeling if we negotiate something in good faith, knowing we're coming from a weaker standpoint of being the minority party, but if we negotiate in the House, will it be respected in the Senate? And that's led to a lot of this long summer that now leads us to our third special session. And the fight is ongoing. Cindy, I'm not quite sure how much time I have left, but I want a few minutes. I just want to transition to kind of where we are. And you mentioned it's our third special. Hopefully it will be our last special. Obviously, we're dealing with redistricting, which is vital and has a major impact on, ballot access and elections. And I think people feel beat down right now after these specials, and the legislation that was passed that contradicts the Secretary of State's office, contradicts the honest landscape of where Texas is on voting. And we also know that there's, provisions in this bill that was passed in the second special session that will make it harder for people to have access to the ballot box. And that takes us backwards. So where do we go? We have to stay hopeful. We have to stay inspired, because I think these challenges are hard, and we know that we can get there. I think Cindy will probably be able to testify to this group that she can walk in a Democrat or Republicans' offices, find the right staff members, sit down and talk about a best practice policy, and you probably win people over and change hearts and minds. And I feel like we do the same thing, such as this ballot by mail tracker that I filed 2 years ago and couldn't get a hearing on, to now major bipartisan support working with, Senator Hughes and myself. So I think we have to stay hopeful that we can continue to move towards progress of, fully accessible ballots, which is our goal. I think to do that, we have to keep talking about what are best practices from other states. Let's keep talking about how online voter registration not only increases access to the ballot box, but also increases security around voter registration. So that's a vital thing. And I think the longer we have that conversation, the more success we'll find. I will say, just in my conversations from January to now, we are seeing bipartisan support quietly behind the scenes for legislation like that. So we need you all to keep having those conversations about why it's not only good for increasing access, but also for security. Let's just think through our narrative of how to accomplish those dual goals that I think is what leads us to success. We need to look at legislation for disabled individuals to be able to vote. We've had lots of testimony over my 2 terms in the legislature about how to do that. I filed a bill that would use a current system that we use for military overseas, where the ballot is emailed. You use your computer to fill out the ballot, but then you print it out and send back a physical ballot. We have legislation that would expand that to the disability community. We've heard testimony after testimony that says the safest and most secure ballot is one I can fill out myself. And that's what this legislation would enable. Think about maybe someone who does not have sight using their technology through their computer to fill out their ballot in privacy, not relying on an assistant, and then submitting that and printing it and mailing it back in. I have legislation for that. During last special session, we had Republicans even file amendments to SB 7 to do that legislation. So that's my point. If we stay hopeful, we keep having honest conversations, myself, peer-to-peer, colleague to colleague, you all with best practices, we're moving the needle when we have those one-on-one interactions, because it was testimony from the disability community that is making us get headway on that type of bill. In fact, I think it was called out that I had that bill. We've now got Republicans that support that bill publicly and have even filed, like I said, amendments for it. So I think it's just over the horizon that we're going to pass legislation like that. So I feel optimistic and positive that if we don't give up, if we don't get deterred by what we see as some setbacks in policy, that we will continue to win, to move the needle and ultimately win the day and make Texas a leading state on voter access and make Texas a leading state on participation. So that's what we have to all do. And from the grassroots standpoint, you guys truly lead the way. League of Women Voters, I'm impressed. Y'all never seem to get deterred. So it's that spirit that we all need to follow. You're there at 3 a.m, 4 a.m, 5 a.m, waiting to testify, to tell the committees how you feel about a policy. And to me, it's encouraging and it's inspiring. And then I know you're going to be out there doing voter registration and doing every bit you can through forums and other ways to let us know about policy for your candidates. All of these are tools that increase access. So I'm so inspired by League of Women Voters and how diligent y'all are. And I just want to help any way I can as we work towards our shared goal of increasing civic engagement and participation, and ultimately, like I said, making Texas a leading state on participation in the voting process. Thank y'all for having me. I look forward to answering some questions. Thank
you so much, Representative. And viewers, please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll try to get to those as soon as we can. We really appreciate your mentioning online voter registration. That's been our #1 goal since I've been involved, and it was a couple of sessions before that. I don't know that I've testified on any bill that I haven't mentioned online voter registration, regardless of what the topic was, because it is extremely important. Accuracy, security, and all the other reasons. Let's jump right ahead to someone who represents that group of people who have been affected as much as anyone else in this last year, and that's the elections officials. We're so pleased to have Isabel Longoria with us today from Harris County, who is election administrator #1, first one in Harris County, where previously the county clerk and the voter registration was under the, much like here in Travis County, the tax assessor collector. So Isabel has distinguished herself in many ways and was very involved. If the Zoom controller will bring up Isabel Longoria, please. Was the one in charge of all of the improvements and ways to deal with the pandemic and all the other things going on this last 2020 election. So Isabel, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate your positive outlook as well and look forward to hearing from what you have to say today.
Thank you. And I'll lead off by saying that here in the Houston area, I was a League of Women Voters Rising Star, joined the board, and was very active in the Voters Guide and helping it get translated into Chinese and Vietnamese here in Harris County, since we have 4 languages that people can vote in. So I am a big, I don't know what we call ourselves now, a league head, a leaguer, a woman of voting, but it's that passion that ended up leading me to, it truly a surprise for me, applying and getting appointed to be the first elections administrator of Harris County. I did work under interim clerk, county clerk Chris Hollins for the November 2020 presidential. So when we put in drive-through voting and the 24-hour voting, and people don't even know, we actually changed and color-coded our mail ballot envelopes so that they were easier to use, to the point that our mail ballot program improved. And again, putting in a cure system that Representative Busey, as he said, was a best practice that we learned from Bastrop County actually in mail ballot tracking, that is now being promoted as a best practice across the state. So we're proud to be one of those first counties kind of working through the kinks. One of the results of that is that our mail ballots rejection rate went from an average of 11% to every election to 0.03% for the November 2020 presidential election. So that's about 10% of mail ballot users that our signature verification committee, a bipartisan committee, were able to reach those folks, to call them, to send them letters, to get them to come in and correct errors, or if they couldn't correct those errors, encourage them to, to go vote in person so that their vote counted instead of being thrown out for what is obviously human errors. And that's kind of a big theme that I saw during the Texas legislature, is One, there are human errors. Let me be the first to break it to you. With 800 presiding judges on election day in Harris County, over 11,000 election clerks and workers, there are human errors. But human errors that have been happening for every election, that we have systems to catch, where we retrain people on the spot and constantly improve our processes, to the point that for every election, we have Department of Justice inspectors, we have Texas Secretary of State auditors, literally in our central count area for the November presidential election. We have people from the Attorney General's office, we have people from the county attorney's office, we have poll watchers. And that was quite a bunch. We even had the media there with cameras for the presidential, but we get that every single election. Harris County, we do our logic and accuracy test, which is the 3 mandated tests, 3 logic and accuracy tests that you have to do for every election. For every election, there's something called what we call a partial manual count, so a manual counting, where the Secretary of State delivers basically a set of precincts and a set of races and says, go back, hand count. You know, even before we went to a paper ballot system in Harris County, you had to hand count the mail ballots. Make sure that what you reported election night is what you get when you hand count those ballots. And in Harris County, we're there. We comply. Per Representative Busey, that new bill about risk limiting audits, Harris County has voluntarily opted in to be a mega county as part of the pilot project to figure out risk limiting audits for the rest of the state. And so I say that all to say, you know, I'm sure you all know, we have now another audit, surprise audit that was announced Thursday evening. We still don't have details about it from the Secretary of State's office. I think everyone, including us and the other big counties, are waiting who got selected for it. And really the sense I get is, at what point are we going to be done with November 2020 and recognize all of the elections that have happened since then and all the elections moving forward? So I'm taking the stance very much so that, one, I need to know what exactly the audit is, because it's my job to protect the voters of Harris County. And so I am literally not allowed by law to just open up the boxes and say, go touch whatever you want and look at whatever you want. There are very limited circumstances under which we can open the election records ever without a court order for people to inspect them. I don't know if that's what the Secretary of State is looking at, what laws they want to do said audit, or if they're just kind of using it as a new umbrella term because it's the happy word of the day, to go back and say we want to reassure people that November 2020 was executed absolutely to the standards that the Texas Election Code dictates. I have no doubt that the Harris County election was run smoothly, but the question is, how do we put this to bed? Is this the audit? If something comes out of this, is this going to be used again to create more conspiracy theories and more audits and more investigations and more inspections? At what point do we say enough is enough? The elections have happened. All the audits, all the checks and balances, all the folks who have come through who feel satisfied are satisfied. And the only remaining folks who don't like the answer that everything was fine is the conspiracy theories. And quite frankly, I think people trying to spin this per Harvey Kronberg's, right, into some kind of election message or who knows what for the upcoming primaries. So that's where I'm getting exhausted, is at what point do we put November 2020 to rest? Because I've had the December 2020 runoffs, the first as the elections administrator, went off with a hitch. We implemented new voting machines in Harris County, so touchscreen paper ballot voting machines in 3 months. It is the most machines in the shortest amount of time that our vendor Hart has ever done across the county. And we did it successfully for the May elections and continued using drive-through voting and continued sending mail ballot applications to voters over 65 and did our expanded hours and created the mail ballot kind of cure process and tracking system, and had a phone line where if you as a voter had any question, had any concern, wanted to report any poll watcher for anything, you could call us and get immediately connected to the county attorney's office to escalate that and investigate it within a matter of minutes. And we did our mail ballots improvements, right? That made it mail ballots easier to use, that have that color coding system, and went to the legislature to fight against all these wild, again, conspiracy theory based laws, and tried advocating for things like online voter registration and, by the way, online mail ballot applications. So again, mail ballot applications, you have to print, you have to have a printer and internet and find a stamp and mail it in, and you have to redo those every year per state law. So all of that, we hosted the May elections, and I'll take a nerdy point here. If you thought it was impressive that for a presidential election, which are always the most popular elections in our country, We hit 68% of our registered voters come out, which is 1.65 million voters in Harris County. That's all good and well, but there's always, kind of presidentials always get a lot, especially contentious presidentials. It's almost not impressive to me. What is impressive as an election nerd is that all of those innovations that we implemented in the May elections, which was our local cities, some of our school boards, some of our mud districts. I mean, the true things that represent and control the water you drink on a daily basis, who takes out your trash, all that good stuff. There was an average of 4% turnout, and we almost doubled it to 7.4%. Doubled it by using all of those innovations, a large majority of which was mail ballot voting, because for the first time ever, people got a mail ballot application, not because a campaign decided that they would be a good voter, not because they already knew about mail ballot voting, because they had an education and access to internet and printers and stamps and transportation to mail things out, because they solely were a voter over 65. And I believe that everyone has the right to be educated on their rights to vote, those methods of voting, and decide for themselves what are the best opportunities to vote without bias from a campaign, from a true nonpartisan source like me as an elections administrator. And that's the spirit that I'm taking into November 2021. You want to keep doing an audit about last year, go ahead. I'm excited to announce that on Tuesday, Harris County will be putting up for consideration by the Harris County Commissioners Court that we're going to be offering a voting location for the first time in Texas in the Harris County Jail, because there are people who have been denied their right to vote just purely because they've been detained on speculation that they might have committed a crime. The only other city that I know of that has done that is Chicago. And I'll be truthful, even previous administrations in Harris County have made up excuses that it couldn't happen because it was a difficult project to implement. But I consider that my job is to jump through hoops so voters don't have to. So, I get a lot of, how do you stay positive? How do you, what motivates you to do this, et cetera. There's no magic bullet. What motivates me is doing a good job as a public servant, implementing the projects that I want to see, that I think all voters want, that you as taxpayers want to know are happening. True innovation, and innovation in not even being creative ideas, just learning the other creative things people are doing and making it happen in Harris County is an incredibly low bar in Texas right now, unfortunately. And so to me, not doing it is worse, right? Not doing it means we have people who are denied their fundamental right to vote. Not doing it means we leave people out of the system that have been historically left out over and over and over because it's too hard to solve that problem. That's my freaking job, is to solve the hard problems. And I enjoy it and I love it. And even when I hear about lawsuits and audits and whatever, it just means someone has a question and I'm here to have the answer. So I'm pretty pumped. I'm not going to stop until someone removes me. And even then, I'll try and join the League of Women Voters in Houston and keep advocating for all these things. So that's how I keep my positive attitude. It's an absolute pleasure to serve here in Harris County. I'm in my dream job and I just can't imagine doing anything else than pushing the boundaries, because for me, the result again is protecting the fundamental aspect of democracy, which is free, fair, and accessible and safe elections. And if we don't do that, to Representative Busey's point, then we kind of destroy everything else that happens in a democracy if we can't trust the elections and who we represent into those offices. So I'll stop on that happy note and pass it over to Mr. Busey Clancy here, who I'm sure feels just as impassioned. Buser Clancy, sorry.
Thanks so much, Isabel. We really appreciate your voicing what the League of Women Voters is all about, and appreciate your being such a big champion of that. And we will go to our last panelist here today. You may not have heard Thomas Buser Clancy's name before, but you certainly do know about his work. And if we could have the Zoom pass over to that. Tommy has been a great friend to the League of Women Voters since joining ACLU in 2018, as he's been involved in the lawsuits that the current one that we've just filed in association with the disability community statewide and other organizations against SB1, and also played a role in the 2019 effort to of the Secretary of State to remove about 10,000 voters, 100,000 voters, excuse me, in 2019. So we've asked Tommy here to talk about the perspective of the legal community in defending voting rights and election laws here in Texas. Thank you so much, Tommy, for joining us today.
Thank you, Cindy, so much for having me. It's always a little dangerous to end on a happy note and then pass it on to a lawyer, but I'll do my best. As Cindy noted, it's been an honor to work alongside and to represent the League of Women Voters in a variety of challenges to ensure that everyone in Texas can have their voice heard through voting. And it's an honor to be here along with these other distinguished panelists. In addition to the work that Cindy's flagged, I did want to mention that with the ACLU of Texas, we also represent Crystal Mason and Hervis Rogers in their criminal cases for alleged illegal voting. And in both cases, those individuals at worst committed an innocent mistake regarding their eligibility and are facing years behind bars. And I mentioned that representation because a lot of the discussion about election bills occurs in hypotheticals. But when you have an election bill like SB1 that starts to add more and more criminal aspects to running elections, to helping people vote, to voting itself, the consequences are not hypothetical. Those criminal offenses wind up with individuals facing real jail time. And it's a scary moment to have offenses like that included in a bill that just came out of the legislature. So I think that, there's been some discussion of what happened during the sessions. We started out with what was called SB7, which was substantially worse than SB1. And there was a lot of advocacy surrounding a variety of provisions. And, in conversations with reporters and other individuals, they always say, like, list your top 5 bad things about SB7 or SB1. And the problem is that these bills are 60 to 80 pages long, and they really do drastically change the election code. So if you list your top 5, the next 5 changes that are bad are just around the corner, and you really feel like you're leaving something out. It's really hard to understate the damage that SB7 was going to do, and then some of the bad things that remain in SB1. But there was a lot of work by the advocacy communities, by the League of Women Voters, by Isabella Longoria, and a lot of great work by legislators, including Representative Busey, to remove a lot of particularly egregious provisions from the bill. Representative Busey mentioned this souls to the polls provision that kind of sprang up out of nowhere at the end of the regular session. But there had been a negotiation back and forth about what are the hourly constraints that are going to be put on early voting. And, it's our position, I think the position of a lot of people here, that counties shouldn't be told what hours they can conduct early voting. If they decide they want to do it for 24 hours like Harris did, they should be allowed to. But there had been this back and forth, and some time periods have been settled on. I think it was roughly what we see now in SB1, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then out of nowhere, there was a drastic decrease on that just for the Sunday of early voting. And it seemed to very particularly target Black voters who engage in souls to the polls coming from church to go vote. And the outcry to that, which occurred right around the time of quorum break, was extreme, both in terms of it being, a bad idea, but also clearly illegal to target a particular group of people and their voting practices, and that has been removed. And I'll name one other egregious provision that has been removed, I think, through advocacy and pointing out problems with its legality, and that is, in the original drafts of many of these bills, the bill would have banned the ability for someone who needed assistance to get assistance from anyone who encouraged them. And there was a very real fear that would prevent parents from using their children as assistants, because in a very normal interaction, you would have a child, like a 18-year-old, 19-year-old saying, "Mom or Dad, you should go vote. Bring me as your assistant. I will help translate. I will help you with whatever you need." And that ban on encouragement, coupled with criminal provisions, had an extreme likely effect of preventing parents from using even their children. And there was constant discussion of how this was not only a bad idea, but blatantly illegal. And it eventually was removed sort of at the last minute. So it is fair to say that over the course of its iterations from SB7 to SB1, many bad provisions were removed. But we're still left with a bill, SB1, that makes it harder and scarier to vote, particularly for individuals with disabilities and communities of color. So the bill has passed and it's been signed by Governor Abbott, and that means we move on to the next stage of some bills' lives, which is its challenges in court now. And as Cindy mentioned, the ACLU of Texas, along with the Texas Civil Rights Project and other organizations, we represent the League of Women Voters, Rev Up, TOP, and some other organizations in a challenge to SB1. And this is one of 4 challenges to SB1 that's occurring in federal court. And there's actually one additional challenge to SB1 that's occurring in state court right now. So many community groups, grassroots groups, groups that work with particularly individuals with disabilities, Hispanic voters, Black voters, have seen SB1 for what it is and filed suit. The federal lawsuits are before a judge in San Antonio. It's in an early stage of litigation, is what I would say. So there's not, anything to report on likelihood of success or things like that, though we think that our arguments are very good. And so what I'll just spend a little bit of time focusing on at the end here is some of what we're challenging in our lawsuit, to give you a sense of some of the provisions that are included in SB1 that hopefully will be struck down. So I mentioned earlier that there was a provision that would have prevented people who need assistance from using anyone that encourages them. Well, that's been thematic throughout SB1, is trying to make it harder for voters who need assistance to actually get it. And you just have to take a step back and ask yourself, okay, who in Texas and by federal law is entitled to assistance? Those are voters with disabilities, and they're voters with limited English proficiency, which in Texas is Latinx voters, Asian American Pacific Islander voters. So when you attack the ability to get assistance, you are attacking those communities. And the part of SB1 that made it in, that still remains, is there's a provision that limits the sort of assistance that voters can get, and very particularly prevents an assistant to a voter from answering any of the voter's questions. So it used to be in this oath that assistants would take, that they would say, I'm limiting my assistance to this, that, and the other, and it included a phrase, and answering questions. That phrase was explicitly deleted in the new bill that came out. And so that prevents the honest back and forth between an assistant and a voter. And you say, well, these are voters who need assistance, who might need to understand, how do I operate this machine? Can you explain to me this instructions that I see? Or maybe they're an assistant who is translating for the voter, and there's a question about translation. What did you mean when you said that about this ballot initiative? Under the current provision, the assistant could not answer those questions. And not only are they not allowed to under the oath, but it's now explicit in the oath that the assistant is taking it under penalty of perjury. So we're adding all of a sudden this new threat of criminal prosecution if you violate your oath. And as I mentioned at the beginning, those threats of criminal prosecution aren't hypothetical. They end up with individuals facing real jail time. And we're talking about the community of people who are assisting voters being faced with that. That's deeply disturbing. So that is one of the provisions that we're challenging in the lawsuit. And I'll mention one other. I know we're running short on time and want to move to a Q&A, but there's also a new provision for mail ballots that says when you submit a mail ballot application and your mail ballot, you have to write down your social security number or driver's license number. And there are a few problems with this. And honestly, it's a provision that in the legislature, things move very quickly. And I think if everyone had taken a breath, maybe they would have realized that this is not a bad idea and it's not going to be functional. But as it got jammed through, that's not how it worked out. And so you have to provide these numbers, or you can say, I've never gotten a driver's license or a social security number. But this doesn't account for individuals who are in group homes or things like that, who maybe at some point had a driver's license, have that number, but don't have any reasonable access to it, aren't going to be able to provide it. So all of a sudden, those individuals can't fill out that section of the ballot application at all. So that's one problem with that provision. The second is that while they tinkered with the language, it still says that what you write down on your mail ballot application or your mail ballot has to identify the same voter as what was in your voter registration form. And the big question here is, well, let's say while I'm writing it down, I accidentally switch my two numbers. I switch a 9 and an 8. And then they're going to look back at the voter registration and it's closed, but does it identify the same voter? Does it not identify the same voter? There's not reasonable guidance, and there's a substantial chance some counties are going to be rejecting individuals simply for, writing down the wrong number, or maybe the county official reads a 9 as a 4, and then that individual gets rejected. And there are some cure provisions for the mail ballot itself, but those cure provisions are not really robust. So what this has added is this extra procedural hurdle that every male voter now has to fill out, that's filled with traps, essentially, where you might have your mail ballot application, or I think worse, your actual mail ballot rejected for something that has nothing to do with whether you're an actually eligible voter or anything along those lines. So that's another provision that we're challenging in these lawsuits. And that is an ongoing, the lawsuits are ongoing and will play out over the fall. And, some of these lawsuits play out over multiple years. So we're in the early stages, but we are optimistic that, we believe that some of these provisions are blatantly illegal, and we're optimistic that the court will hear the same.
Thanks, Tommy. I'm going to go now to the Q&A, if everybody's wanting to join back in. Looking at the questions, first one I'm going to go to is regarding poll watcher training. And I know as Tommy has mentioned and Rep. Busey has mentioned, there were many provisions in these bills that started out and were improved along the way. We went everywhere from poll watchers could take videos of people in the voting location to whatever. But as I recall, poll watchers in the last version are required to take training, and that training is to be provided by the Secretary of State's office through an online video, as I believe. The question is, who is going to train the poll watchers so they act within their legal limits? Is there a limit on the number of poll watchers who can be present at the polling site? Are poll watchers allowed to be armed when at the polling place? Does anyone want to raise their hand on this one? Isabel?
I'll take it real quick on the implementation phase. Already in law, and this hasn't been changed, any candidate or campaign essentially is permitted, right, to have poll watchers at any location, but there is a cap. You can only have 2 per entity, so 2 per, again, campaign at any one given location, and only 7 total, regardless of where they are, per county. So, Rep. John Busey can only have 7 total in the county at any given time, and no more than 2 at any single voting location. It all sounds great, but there is actually not a tool right now, at least not one provided by the Secretary of State, to track which poll watchers are at what voting locations. And so that's something we developed in the presidential internally, but I really feel for some of our smaller and mid-sized counties trying to track that across the county. So there is a rule, the implementation of it is hard. I think the training is going to be the same way. I am absolutely thrilled that there's going to be a poll watcher training I think the election office is well poised at the Secretary of State to create that. But again, what is going to be our mechanism? I believe the Secretary of State is still developing, hopefully, some parameters around that we can check and verify that people have gone through that training, so that we can clear them to be poll watchers in the county. So I think there's going to be a little learning curve there. On guns, it doesn't matter now that we have constitutional carry and free for all now in Texas. The only person, interestingly enough, the only person allowed to have a gun on premise is the presiding judge, from a quirk of them being a judge from the olden days. But I will say, at least in Harris County, very few, if any, actually bring a gun, and no voters, no poll watchers, no election workers, no matter what, are allowed to have a gun on the voting premise. And I will say, I think we had 1 of 800 in November who just really felt adamant about being armed as a presiding judge on election day. So stat wise, we're pretty good there.
Cindy, can I jump
Yes,
in and just
please.
add? And all of that was right on. And I just want to add to the point of working across the aisle and the role of advocacy. The poll watcher area of the bill, SB 7, SB 1, was, I would say, at the top of our concerns in the Democratic caucus. It was a lot of issues with the bill, but this area was number one. And I think it was a big part in, why did we have quorum break and what would this lead to voter type of intimidation. Earlier versions of the bill were going to allow you to have a free pass to intimidate, basically, because you would have to be witnessed and receive a warning and then be removed. When this bill finally passed in special session 2, it added training, and that was because of advocates like you all showing up and testifying. And my colleagues across the aisle heard you, and they bought into the training, and it was because, I think, of the constant pressure that the outside community gave. So that's just another win to the advocates of why this matters. And as said, we don't know all the details of that training. Representative Click carried that, who used to be chair of the elections committee, and it's really left up to the Secretary of State to decide to define it and make the training. But my understanding is that you will, once you complete it, you will get a certificate of completion, and that will be something that you use to prove your completion. It's also in the oath now, when you show up to be a poll watcher, that you have taken the training. So then you're swearing in the oath. And I also want to say, getting the other, so that was a big change that we got at the end in the House. And another one was that a poll watcher who gets out of line can be removed on a first offense. Those were 2 major hurdles that obviously we're not happy that this bill is law, but you talk about working across the aisle, you talk about outside pressure, it can make a difference. And these are 2 great examples of that.
It might be helpful for one of you to reiterate who is eligible to appoint poll watchers. I don't know that everyone realizes that.
I can do it quickly, although Isabel probably knows the answer better than I do. But I think it's basically any campaign or initiative on the ballot. So, in Austin, we had a big transportation initiative. That initiative could have had a poll watcher on site. So anything tied to the ballot, and the parties can do it as well. So, the Republican Party, Democratic Party, Libertarian Party, they can have a poll watcher as well. Isabel, what did I miss? So.
Okay, let's go to, there are a couple of questions about this newly announced forensic audit. And I think it's really important that we all don't seem to know what that is. I think it's using terminology that's been used in Pennsylvania and Arizona, and it's just a catchphrase at this point. But they want to know the difference between that and a risk limiting audit. And I'll first say that the League of Women Voters has been on the record for the last 3 sessions promoting a risk limiting audit as it relates to the election equipment security. And it's also aimed at improving election equipment across the state. And this risk limiting audit is tied to that, to a time in the future when all counties will need to use the most updated and secure election equipment possible. And if you want to speak to that, Representative Busey or Isabel or anyone else, Tommy, whoever else has something to add to that? No?
Rep, you see, I
Okay.
think
No,
up
go
to you
for
to
it,
cover the
Isabel.
risk limiting audit. Yeah.
Well, I think it's just important to know what you said earlier is this is a buzzword that is being used, but we don't really know what it means. We don't know what, the Secretary of State's office, since we don't have a Secretary of State, said that this is going on, all in this last week. I don't think any of us really know what that means. I hope it's not just me in the dark. These other things we talked about earlier, the legislation of risk limiting audits, this is just looking backwards, making sure the system worked. You're making sure there wasn't intrusion in the system, that the paper and all the numbers add up and the machines work normally. The difference here that we're worried about, as Isabel pointed out, is without court order, you can't open all of these records. You can't do all that. So this buzzword being thrown around that's really tied to this national narrative around the 2020 election, we don't really know what that means. I'm sure Isabel maybe can add a little more to that, but it's just kind of in the dark. And it's important to know the difference. Risk limiting is just best practice, making sure that the system worked normally and nothing needs to be tweaked as we move forward to the next election. This other one is, honestly, I don't know how to say this, trying to respect the nonpartisan. I think it's just tied to the big lie of, who won the election and how and where. And we're just trying to find any example of fraud because, as stated by the Secretary of State, these elections ran so smoothly and securely. So it's hard to understand what it is.
Toss a political note in on this. The speculation, of course, is that the audit was ordered up as a way to placate former President Trump, and that he had been demanding that a full audit be placed on the call for the legislative session. I don't think that the governor's office truly knows what it is, what the procedure is going to be at this stage. The great concern of the Abbott campaign is that if they don't fully satisfy the president, that there's an alternative candidate named Don Huffines, who is to the right of Governor Abbott, and that it's not beyond the pale of possibility for the former president, to withdraw his endorsement of Governor Abbott if he doesn't fully comply or seem to comply, and throw that endorsement to former State Senator Huffines. And so this was done quickly. It was done. The announcement was made in the evening, and I think they're probably scrambling to figure out what it is they're going to do, just as much as Isabel is.
Yeah, Governor Abbott, I think on morning shows today, said that the audits have been going on for months at this point, which I think is news to a lot of people.
Yes.
The only other thing I would add is that there's some discussion of when will we move on from 2020 in terms of these sorts of audits, but I think it's important to recognize that the goal of just you throwing around the word audit and constantly relitigating 2020 is a little bit about 2020, but it's also a lot about every election in the future, and to plant the seeds that elections are never over. And that there's always the ability to question them, and then to make it so that in 2024 or some other time, if the result is not what's desired, well, then it's kind of normal now to switch that out, to relitigate it. And that, I think, is really where the danger is of these kind of freewheeling, what we saw in Arizona sorts of audits that are attempting to relitigate the election over and over and over again.
Yeah, I know we're kind of jabbing on this question. I want to make a difference or point out something to you. One, there is literally no definition that I know of in the Texas Election Code of a forensic audit. So it is a completely, as far as legally, a completely made up term. That is why we consider it a buzzword. I, as one of the 4 counties that will be audited, as of 3:42 p.m. today, have received no instruction on what that is. I would love to comply. All I need to know is where's my court order coming to open up whatever boxes you need me to open, but I cannot open that. I cannot open my books. I can't reveal anything to preserve the sanctity of the vote of Harris County voters until I get more direction other than a press release. But I think there's been a fundamental shift too. We all know about hanging chads. That's like one of the first election things I remember. So disputing the results of an election is not new in the United States, right? There's always people who are losing, who are right on the cusp, who, want to make sure that the votes were done accurately, that whatever margin of human error can be accounted for, that, we truly are squared away. The difference now is not contesting the results after they've happened, where you really have just a slim margin that could fall within that human error. It is even before voting started in November 2020, back in September, back in August, I had poll watchers. I had the Attorney General coming out. I had the Department of Justice coming out. We already had the conspiracy theory starting, and we had, lawyers from different parties on election night sitting at the party with us, scrutinizing every single thing we were doing, not from a poll watcher's accountability, but lining up what we knew would be a future lawsuit against us and questioning everything we were doing. And so that's kind of where the narratives have shifted, I think, for election officials. It's not your typical, okay, there might be a loser and they want to make sure it's going all right. It's just even before voting starts, right? It must all be wrong. And that's very frustrating to me as an election official.
I have a question that's somewhat related to that. And the question is, what are the effects of not having a Secretary of State on elections in general in Texas, since we do not have someone in that position at the time? I know the deputy is the acting Secretary of State currently. Does anyone have any comments on that?
Why not? I might get kicked out in 2 months anyway. I think the effect in the day-to-day operations is very little. The deputy has the full authority to act on behalf of the interim. I would take a stab. Maybe Harvey has more information on who is jockeying to be Secretary of State that is there now, and then men might feel compelled to do certain things as well. I think overall, though, from a local perspective, it is good to have, a state board and state oversight, not for the big counties like Harris County. We have over 160 permanent staff to carry out elections. I look at some of my peers next door who are carrying elections with 5 permanent election staff and volunteers. It is almost impossible for them to host an election without a Secretary of State who can provide resources, who can provide those trainings across the state. So please take this to know that I'm not knocking on the idea of a Secretary of State. What I'm knocking on is, give us some more preparation. Let's actually do work and plan it out so that we can make sure democracy is being executed correctly and not just this partisan ping pong ball back and forth.
And I also, the only other thing I would add is that from a democratic accountability perspective, you want to have a Secretary of State that has been confirmed through the legislature. So what we saw in 2019 is that the failed voter purge led to the acting interim Secretary of State not being confirmed because there was, such a backlash against this horrendous attempt to purge voters. And then this year in 2021, there wasn't even, it seemed like a genuine attempt to confirm the acting interim Secretary of State Hughes. And now, even though there hasn't been a real Secretary of State and we're in special sessions, Governor Abbott doesn't seem to be motivated to put someone up who would then need to be confirmed by the Senate. And I think that we saw the same playbook in national politics where President Trump was saying, well, I actually much prefer acting or interim heads of organizations because they don't need to be confirmed. And when you stop having the confirmation process, then whatever check, even if it's, secondhand where we elect the senators who then have to do the confirmation, whatever check the people have on the Secretary of State just goes away.
I'll also bring up, there are several people who have posed questions regarding redistricting. And I'll say up front, the League of Women Voters has a totally separate redistricting issue chair, and we're very active in the redistricting process. I'm not competent enough to respond to that, but let me ask a couple of these questions to see if anyone else wants to field this question. One says, Senator Huffman, chair of the redistricting committee in the Senate, said yesterday that senators had to file proposed maps by today at 10 a.m. and that there would be voting on these maps next week. That's not enough time to evaluate the maps. Is there no rule or guideline on how much time needs to go by before a vote occurs? And there was one other, but does anyone on the panel feel able to respond to the time frame or any of the details on especially Senate district maps, I suppose?
I might take a stab at this, and that is that the House is actually been being more thorough and deliberative in the way they're going about doing this and proceeding more slowly. The Senate has been a bum's rush from the beginning. The first view that the senators had of their map, they were called into Senator Huffman's office. They had an hour to look at it. They couldn't take a copy away. They've redrawn made several efforts to redraw Senator Powell, Beverly Powell, out of her district. And it seems to me the theme here is that they now view the Voting Rights Act as completely toothless, which obviously key provisions have been taken out of it, but they're going to challenge the Voting Rights Act on any number of things. And when you look at Senator Powell's district, it went from being as originally drawn or proposed by Senator Huffman, it was, if I remember correctly, a 52% minority district. It's now a 24% minority district. And according to Michael Lee, who's a redistricting expert, where there is a possibility to draw coalition districts where minorities could have a say. That is still required by Article 2, but it looks like this is going to be a full court press. One last thing I'll say is that, again, Michael Lee has pointed out that every redistricting cycle, the Legislative Council law firm for the legislature puts out guidelines. They haven't put out guidelines this cycle. Lee suspects that they're getting their advice from the Attorney General as opposed from Legislative Council. And Legislative Council is responsive to politics, but is generally apolitical. And I'll leave it to your membership to draw their own conclusion about the office of the Attorney General.
I see one of the other questions talks about, any chance of getting like independent redistricting commissions in place. I think Rep. Donna Howard was on earlier, or she's maybe just attending. She has championed this for most of the last decade, trying to get it done. It needed to be done before this session. We needed to get it done last session to get it in place. It didn't happen. And if there's any way to go around that and do it now, I'll just say it's not going to happen. So to answer the question, it's not going to happen. It's something that we have to continue to aspire to, next time around, which is a decade from now. So this is going to be partisan. It's going to be bad. We don't have near the federal protections that we've had in the past, as Harvey just pointed out. But it wasn't without Donna Howard's efforts and many others trying to do it, something I've also supported. But it's going to be done fast in the Senate, as we're seeing. And I agree, it's been a lot more deliberative in the House. The chairman, Todd Hunter, has been asking us all for input. There's been hearings just talking about our communities and what they mean, and so on and so forth. But we haven't seen his map yet, so time will tell how the House will handle it. But it's not going to happen this time. There will not be an independent redistricting in Texas.
I guess that does bring up another question that maybe some of you want to speak to, and that's what's going on at the federal level with the two bills that are still, I believe, in consideration to make some changes. I'm not sure if the question is the possibilities for that passage. I know there's probably varying opinions about that and how it might affect Texas.
Well, obviously, the quick answer is that unless one of the couple of senators decide to change their vote on the filibuster, the odds are pretty slim that we're going to see any kind of voting reform out of the Congress. I find it ironic, however, they're defending the filibuster at the same time that the lieutenant governor, each time he loses a Republican, reduces the number of members necessary to be able to bring a bill to the floor. He eliminated the 2/3 rule, dropped it down to 3/5, and essentially now it's virtually a majority plus one or two to give permission to bring a bill to the floor. So the contrast, the irony of protecting the filibuster in DC and surrendering the 2/3 rule in the Texas Senate is I'll just be polite and say ironic.
Ironic. Thank
You
you
know-
all so much. I do want to ask the Zoom person to bring up our last slide because it looks like we've got about 2 minutes. I want to thank the panelists. You've been absolutely terrific. And I want to give you some resources to connect with the League of Women Voters of Texas website. We have as Mary mentioned earlier in our session, we have new resources to provide better website product, and the League of Women Voters of Texas is already exposed theirs. It's up and running. So please go to League of Women Voters Texas, lwvtexas.org, and you'll find all sorts of good information on advocacy, how to take action, to see information about all of our advocacy and issue areas, and for more detailed information on the priorities for voting rights and redistricting, and any other of our more urgent issues that we get involved in, and that's public education, women's health, equal opportunity, income, and immigration. But you'll also find on our website current information about how to vote in Texas. And that reflects these new bills that were passed this year, and will always be striving to present the absolute current election details. Certainly all of the counties in the state have websites, and that's a really good way to find out what's going on in your county, wherever you are. So how to vote, how to help voters, current election details, you'll find it on our website, and you'll find information about the county websites across the state too. I know it's time for me to turn this back over to Mary, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and thank you all so much for participating.
Thank you, Cindy, and a round of applause to all of our panelists for that wonderful
Absolutely.
discussion. Very insightful. Thank you all so much for your time and being here with us today and helping us really learn more in depth what we're looking at as far as the political landscape and the legislative landscape lays as we move forward with the efforts to ensure that voting is a right that is exercised as widely and as frequently as possible under the available laws. So thank you again, Cindy, and thank you again to all of our panelists. And the next few minutes, we're going to be going into a VDR training. So I would encourage everyone to stay on and attend this free training. It's a 27-minute video and some Q&A after that. And then you will receive a quiz online to complete to get your certification. If you haven't been recertified in the last few months, it is probable that your certification has expired. So we invite you to stay with us and to participate in that. And I also want to say thank you to the folks at the League of Women Voters Austin area that helped put on this program today. Katie has been running the Zoom along with support from Joyce Lombard. And Debbie Voss has been a driving effort to try to get all this organized and put together. So thank you, ladies, for your help on that. With that being said, I think we're right almost at about 4 o'clock. So the folks from the League of Women Voters Austin area, we do, I believe, have a link to pull up to do that VDR training.
Hi, I'm Bruce Elfant, Travis County's Tax Assessor Collector and Voter Registrar. I'd like to personally introduce you to our online Volunteer Deputy Registrar training video and exam. We're pleased that you have chosen Travis County's online training to certify as a VDR, and we're committed to providing quality training for all Travis County and Central Texas citizens who wish to become VDRs. And our goal is to offer a variety of training options to make this program as accessible as possible. Travis County is a voter registration leader in Texas, and that's because of our rockstar voter registration team and our civic engagement army of volunteer deputy registrars who register voters and provide voters with a wide array of election information. We couldn't do any of this without the drive and passion of our VDRs. Residents of Central Texas are welcome to join our VDR team through this video, and for the rest of Texas, we invite you to take our virtual VDR training on Zoom. The sign up for our virtual VDR trainings can be found on the main page of our Travis County voter registration website at traviscountytax.org. We also encourage other Texas counties to adopt some of our strategies and tools to help make Texas a more registered and civically engaged state. Thank you again for taking our training. We're grateful for your commitment, and we look forward to working with you to help increase voter registration and civic engagement. Click on the link below and we'll begin the training.
Hello, and welcome to the Travis County Volunteer Deputy Registrar online training video and exam. This training video and examination will certify you as a Travis County VDR for the 2021-2022 cycle. But before we begin, this video training is only meant for residents of Travis County and neighboring counties listed on the screen now. If you are not a resident of Travis County or any of the referenced counties, we recommend you visit the Texas Secretary of State's website to train and certify using the state's version of this presentation, or contact your local voter registrar or elections office to explore their VDR training options. If you are not a resident of Travis County or the above counties, you will not be certified as a Travis County VDR. After this training, you will be directed to take the VDR training exam. Upon passing the exam, you will receive your Travis County VDR certificate and number, a link to the Travis County electronic training packet, a link to this training presentation, and a link to the Travis County VDR Facebook group. You can also use the Travis County VDR certificate to become a VDR in another county through reciprocal certification. All VDRs receive a new VDR number each cycle. A Volunteer Deputy Registrar, or VDR for short, is a volunteer who registers voters in the state of Texas. VDRs are officially appointed by their county voter registrar. A VDR can only register voters for a county in which they have been appointed. Because Texas does not have online voter registration and the deadline to register to vote is 30 days before Election Day, it is of the utmost importance that we have people in the field. Today, we are going to teach you everything you need to know to become a Travis County VDR. In order to become a VDR, you must meet the following qualifications. Be at least 18 years old, be a United States citizen and a Texas resident, not have been determined by a final judgment of a court exercising probate jurisdiction to be totally mentally incapacitated or partially mentally incapacitated without the right to vote. You must also never have been convicted of failing to deliver a voter application to a voter registrar, not have been finally convicted of a felony, or if convicted, you must have fully discharged the sentence including any term of incarceration, parole, or supervision, or completed a period of probation ordered by any court, or been pardoned or otherwise released from the resulting disability to vote. And you must not have been finally convicted of identity theft under Section 32.51 of the Penal Code. These are similar qualifications to become a registered voter as well. VDRs can be trained and certified at any point during a cycle. However, the appointment is only valid for the remainder of that cycle. A VDR cycle begins January 1st of the odd-numbered year and expires December 31st of the following even-numbered year. All VDRs must renew their VDR certification at the end of that 2-year cycle. VDRs training today through this video will have an appointment expiration date of December 31st, 2022. Expiration dates do not change and are only valid for a full 2 years if the VDR is appointed at the beginning of a cycle. If the VDR is appointed later in the year, the VDR certification will only be valid for the remainder of that cycle. What are the duties of a VDR? First, VDRs offer a voter registration application to every Travis County resident. To be clear, VDRs do not qualify applicants to vote and cannot determine if the applicant is qualified to register. If you encounter someone who is already registered, be sure to ask if they are registered at their most current address and under their most current name. Second, if the applicant requests help, you may assist the applicant by reading the questions and writing the information on the application. VDRs are trained and appointed by our office and are authorized to help complete an application. Once you complete the application, instruct the applicant to provide their signature on the signature line and date it. Third, review the completed and signed application. Be sure to correct any errors or obtain missing information. Errors can be corrected by striking out the error and having the applicant initial the strike-through. Then you or the applicant can write the correct information alongside the error. Fourth, complete the receipt at the bottom of the form and give it to the applicant. Advise the applicant to keep the receipt until receiving their certificate in the mail. That receipt serves as their temporary voter registration card until they get their actual card mailed to them. Fifth, inform the applicant that their registration status will be effective 30 days from the date of registration, and certificates are mailed monthly. This is the reason for the voter registration deadline mentioned earlier. Your final duty is to turn the form in. We will go into detail about that later. When it comes to registering voters, there are some things you should and should not do. Do offer voter registration to anyone and everyone. Do not attempt to determine if someone is legally allowed to vote. Do assist the applicant in filling out an application if they request help. Do not sign the application for the applicant. Do team up with other VDRs in order to register more voters. Do not appoint others as VDRs. Only the voter registrar can do so. Do keep track of your completed voter registration applications until they are turned in. Do not keep scans or copies of the voter registration applications you collect. Who is qualified to register to vote? A person registering to vote must be a citizen of the United States, at least 17 years and 10 months old when registering and 18 by election day, not been finally convicted of a felony, or, if a felon, must have completed all of the punishment including any term of incarceration, parole, supervision, or period of probation, or must have received a pardon, and must not have been determined by a final judgment of a court exercising probate jurisdiction to be totally mentally incapacitated or partially mentally incapacitated without the right to vote. As mentioned earlier, these are also the qualifications to become a VDR. Did you know that you could become a VDR in multiple counties? All you have to do is contact the voter registration office of the county of interest, inform them that you are currently certified in Travis County, ask them what their process is for reciprocal certification, gather the items they will need to appoint you as a VDR, and submit the items necessary to receive reciprocal certification. Most counties require a copy of your current Travis County certificate. However, counties also reserve the right to require additional training and county-specific information. The Secretary of State's office does not require that a VDR be trained more than once in a cycle. The yellow VDR application is the form that VDRs will use when registering applicants in person to vote. VDRs are responsible for returning these forms to the county voter registrar's office or one of the designated locations. The applicant may use this form to register to vote for the first time as a new voter, update their name or address on their voter registration record, or to request a replacement voter registration card. Anytime a completed form is turned in, a new voter registration certificate is generated and mailed to the voter. VDRs are encouraged to answer any questions voters may have about this form. Some of the sections on this form are required and some are optional. VDRs are never allowed to suggest the voter provide information in any of the optional fields. Now let's take a closer look at the form and examine the required fields. There are 4 questions within Section 1, but only one field is required in order to process the application. The citizenship question is the only question that must be answered. Not answering the citizenship question would make this form incomplete. In Section 2, applicants should use the name that appears on the document they are using to register to vote. A few things to keep in mind. They must use the name as it fully appears on their government-issued ID. This could be a Texas driver's license, Texas photo ID, or Social Security card. The applicant should not use a nickname, and the applicant should not use an abbreviation or shorter name than what appears on their document. Section 3 should contain the address or intersection of where the applicant currently resides. The address must be complete with street number and name. If the applicant cannot provide a complete address, 2 cross streets are acceptable. An intersection, physical description including cross streets, and temporary addresses are acceptable when registering to vote. It cannot be a P.O. box or a rural address. If their mailing address is the same as their residential address, they can leave it blank. It must be a Travis County address. and it must include a unit or apartment number if applicable. After a couple of optional sections, we come to Section 6, the date of birth section. This is also a required field and will determine if the applicant is eligible to register to vote. The date of birth must include the month, day, and year the applicant was born. VDRs are encouraged to review this section thoroughly to verify the applicant did not fill this section in with an incorrect date or year. After a few more optional sections, we come to Section 9, another required field. Applicants must provide either their Texas driver's license, Texas personal ID, or their Social Security number in order to register to vote. VDRs need to pay close attention to this section for letters of the alphabet, as a Texas driver's license does not include any letters of the alphabet. If the applicant cannot provide either of the numbers required, you will need to direct them to the small box in Section 9 that references not having received these documents. Finally, in Section 10, the applicant's signature and date are required fields, and they confirm the applicant's voter registration application. Keep in mind, you are not legally allowed to question an applicant's signature, and any marks or symbols made by the applicant in this section should be accepted as a signature. If you or someone else is serving as a witness to the signature, a signature of the witness in relationship to the applicant should be included next to the applicant's signature within the signature box. Signature names may differ from legal names. The signature date is crucial, especially during a registration deadline, because the form is not a mail-in form. After you review the form, address any mistakes and point out any missing sections, you're ready to validate the form and provide the receipt to the applicant. VDRs will fill in their assigned VDR number and sign and date the form above the perforated line. VDRs will then fill out the receipt at the bottom of the form and provide the receipt to the applicant. VDRs will print the applicant's legal name on the first line of the receipt as it appears on Section 2 of the application. They will print their name on the second line of the receipt and provide their VDR number in the deputy number section. They will sign their name and date on the third line of the receipt. Travis County does not require VDRs to carry receipt books. Therefore, you can leave the receipt box blank or write NA on your form. If you run out of forms, you can print these forms from the Secretary of State's website. There are two additional types of forms that are used by VDRs when registering voters. One version is the Travis County postage paid mail-in application, and it is provided by Travis County Voter Registration. This version is for VDRs to distribute to residents of Travis County who would like to register but do not have the time to register with the VDR. The applicant is responsible for mailing in their own application. This form does not have a receipt, so VDRs cannot be responsible if a form is lost. VDRs are never allowed to mail the applications in for an applicant. Due to the address on the return side, please reserve these for Travis County residents on a walkaway basis. The second version is the Texas Secretary of State postage paid mail-in application. This application is similar to the Travis County postage paid application, but is provided by the SOS. This type of form is for VDRs to distribute to residents of a county in which VDRs are not currently certified. The applicant is responsible for mailing in their own application. This form does not have a receipt, so VDRs cannot be responsible if a form is lost. As with the Travis County mail-in form, do not mail it in for them. Due to the address on the return side, please reserve these for residents in all other counties. Turning a mail-in form for an applicant will serve as grounds for termination of VDR certification. This applies to both the Travis County and the Secretary of State mail-in forms. Because of COVID, we've made arrangements for VDRs to pick up and drop off applications during business hours and for VDRs to drop off after hours and on weekends. Materials can be picked up during normal business hours at the main Travis County Tax Office at 5501 Airport Boulevard. The Voter Registration Division does not have an appointment system, and you do not have to wait in line to enter the building. If you just need to drop off forms and would like to do so after hours or by contactless drop-off, we have two drop-off boxes located on the property at 5501 Airport Boulevard. The two boxes are locked and checked daily. Remember, if the VDR registers a resident well before the registration deadline, the VDR must turn in the form within 5 days of the applicant's signature date. The first day is the day after the signature date. VDRs who turn in forms late are in violation of the law and are subject to disqualification. Or if the VDR is registering voters within a 5-day deadline, the VDR has till the day after the deadline at 4 p.m. to turn in all forms to the registrar's office. VDRs are allowed to give other VDRs forms to deliver, but only VDRs can assist in delivering to an office or designated drop-off location. If someone is legally eligible to register to vote but cannot register themselves to vote, the following people can register them to vote on their behalf: a parent, a child, or a spouse. This person is known as the agent, and that person can fill out the application on behalf of a voter. The agent completes the form and signs their own name with their relationship to the person on the application. Can a VDR be partisan while registering voters? The answer to that question is yes, you can, but with some conditions. If you are registering voters under the banner of Travis County Voter Registration or a nonpartisan group, you cannot be partisan. However, if you are registering voters on your own or with a political campaign, you can be partisan. Regardless of the applicant's party affiliation or political point of view, we must register all interested applicants. What kind of forms of identification can voters take with them to the polls? Travis County Voter Registration and its Civic Engagement Army are committed to registering voters, civically engaging the community to get out the vote, and to encourage others to take part in the electoral process. Let's review the acceptable forms of IDs to take to the polls. These are all the different examples of photo identification you can take with you to a polling location: a Texas driver's license, a Texas election ID certificate, a Texas personal ID card, a Texas handgun license, a U.S. citizenship card with photo, a U.S. military ID card with photo, or a U.S. passport, book, or card. Just so you know, these are the photo IDs voters will most likely have. So if you do not have this ID cheat sheet, which we will include in your resource packet, just remember 2 IDs to recommend to voters. If the voter cannot provide one of the acceptable forms of photo identification, they are still eligible to vote as long as they can provide one of the supplemental forms of identification shown on the screen. They will also need to complete the reasonable impediment declaration at their polling location. This reasonable impediment declaration is provided by the poll worker at the polling location. This form is a statement from the voter that they were unable to receive a photo ID due to a reasonable impediment. One of the supplemental forms of ID is the voter registration certificate that is mailed to the voter after their registration is effective. If the voter has an expired photo ID and is between 18 and 69 years of age, the identification can be expired up to 4 years. And voters who are age 70 and above can use a driver's license or photo ID that has been expired for any length of time if otherwise valid. Your appointment as a volunteer deputy registrar may be terminated by the appointing authority if it is determined that you failed to properly review a voter registration application, intentionally destroyed or physically altered a registration application, or engaged in any other activity that conflicts with your responsibilities as a volunteer deputy registrar. Your appointment as a volunteer deputy registrar will be terminated by the appointing authority if you are finally convicted of any offense under the law relating to delivery of completed voter registration applications to the registrar, or you are finally convicted of an offense under the law relating to performance-based compensation for voter registrations. We would like to briefly acknowledge current events and the state of voter registration during COVID-19. We are encouraging everyone to exercise caution when registering voters. Please make sure to practice social distancing, standing about 6 feet away from the voter, wear gloves and a mask, encourage voters to use their own pens when filling out a form, and wash your hands often and carry hand sanitizer if you can. Remember, it is important that you keep yourself and your community safe and healthy. Once you're finished taking this training, you will receive a training packet which will include the following supplies: the duties of a VDR, the voter registration form cheat sheet, the mailing addresses for those experiencing homelessness, the flyer called Bring It to the Booth, a guide to upcoming elections for Travis County, a volunteer deputy registrar guide, and more. Please keep in mind that these resources are unique to Travis County. If registering voters in another county, you should contact that county's local elections and/or voter registration office for supplies and information about upcoming elections. Here's a checklist of everything you need to register voters: voter registration forms, black or blue pens, a clipboard, your Bring It to the Booth voter ID cheat sheet, your elections calendar, and your VDR number. It is important that you are prepared when registering and informing voters. Thank you for taking the time to view the Travis County Voter Registration VDR training presentation. Please click the link on this slide and you will be redirected to the Travis County VDR exam. Thank you again and good luck.
I am going to turn it over, I believe, to Bruce, who is going to do a Q&A section. Is that, am I right on that one? Matt, Bruce, we're going to
That's,
Bruce, right?
that's what I was told, and Matt is here to make sure that I do it right.
All right. Hopefully he can keep us all in line. So
And everybody should give Matt some applause for the wonderful video that we just saw. He did a great job in putting that together, and we're really proud that once COVID's over, Travis County will have 3 ways that you can become a volunteer deputy registrar. You can watch the video, you can go on our live Zoom trainings, which you can find at our website at traviscountytex.org or .gov, or you can come to some Zoom trainings, in-person trainings, as soon as it's safe to do so again. And we're looking forward to that.
absolutely, Matt, thank you so much for pivoting so quickly and giving us that opportunity to provide this to the attendees who wanted to remain afterwards. It looks like we've got over 35 folks who stayed around, so we're thrilled with that number. I am, Bruce, going to check the Q&A. I don't see much on there. I think these last questions came in prior to the time that we actually started the video. Does anyone have any questions specifically related to the video that we just saw that we should pose? I do have a quick one. Matt or Bruce, Joyce put up in our chat box the link to the exam. Can folks go ahead and do that right now, or do they need to wait on anything, or once we're done, obviously here, but can they click on that link and just get started once we're done with the discussion today?
Yeah, so once they click on the link, they'll begin the exam and fill out their questionnaire, which will capture their information. And based off that information, we'll email out a certificate the next business day, which will be by tomorrow afternoon.
Okay, wonderful. We will also, for everyone who's put an email in today, we will send you that link as well, so that you will have it in case you want to do that at a later time. Bruce, we did have one question come in, and that is, when do signatures need to be witnessed?
Well, the volunteer deputy registrar will be helping you facilitate the filling out of the card. If somebody's visually impaired or disabled, they can actually fill it out for them, but they'll be watching the applicants fill out the card, and they'll see that they've signed it at that point. If we don't have another question, it might be a good time for Matt to talk about the October 4th voter registration deadline and what activities are going on, and how our new and old volunteer deputy registrar can hook in with the league and with our other activities.
That sounds great, Matt.
Yeah, so right now I'm working with a couple of groups, all nonpartisan groups who have organized events, and they're sharing them with me. So I'm going to be sending those out to all the VDRs that are deputized. So if you're training today, you're going to receive an email from us, but it's going to be several groups that have organized events, and I'm just going to call them Texas VDRs because they're not only around in Travis County, but around surrounding counties, and they're looking for help too. So everyone will have a chance to sign up for all those. And we're looking to identify locations in Travis County where we can have voter registration drive-through also. And we'll be organizing stuff through Travis County and sending that out for you all to host voter registration sites for the office around the county.
That sounds wonderful. Obviously, we will also be hosting generally voter registration events through the League of Women Voters. And I am going to go ahead and go back and pull up the link to the form that we have on Google if you are interested in participating in some of those future drives. I'm gonna, hold on, I gotta pull up, talk to everybody on the chat. Everyone, there we go. And here is a link to our Google Docs. So if you are interested in receiving information about some of the registration events that will be done through the League of Women Voters, that's there for you. And I will note that, as has been mentioned throughout the presentation today, but I'll say it again, we are nonpartisan. So the question that came up in the video, which is, can I be partisan when I'm registering voters? If you are acting on our behalf or you are volunteering through a League of Women Voters event, you cannot be partisan. You have to be nonpartisan at any event that is sponsored or organized by us. But we would love to have anyone who is on the training today join our core of volunteers, and that link is there for you in the chat. Are there any other questions at this time to either Bruce or Matt related to the video that we saw or the process that we saw? Anything like that that you would like to bring up right now? Right now it's quiet, guys. I don't know if there's any other information, Bruce, that you want to impart before we close out for the day, or Matt, happy to turn the mic over to you another time. Anything else, gentlemen?
Well, I want to thank, go ahead, Matt, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I'd like to share a link to a website, texasvdrs.com, which is a website that is organized by nonpartisan VDRs, which I'm sure most of you even know, in the Central Texas area, who are leads for our office that have organized events through October 4th. So I'm going to put that link in the chat box. And even though you haven't received your certificate from us, I'd encourage you all to sign up for those events because they're looking for VDRs to work those events.
Wonderful. And Debbie, I think you're on the line and you're going to be the one sending out one of these follow-up communications, you or Mubaraka. So we'll try to include that as well, just so folks can get all the information. Or I think you said, Matt, you'd be sending that out. So maybe we'll just wait on that from you.
Yeah, we'll have it out by tomorrow afternoon.
Wonderful. Whenever we're done discussing, we will leave this live just for a few more minutes so folks can pull the links off of the chat before we close out the meeting. Then Bruce, I'm going to turn it back over to you because I think you had started speaking before we brought up that other last little bit there.
Well, I just wanted to thank the League of Women Voters and all its members for being such a great partner with our voter registration office for so many years. It's been a wonderful partnership, and I want to thank the 36 of you who stuck around today for joining our civic engagement army of over 1,500 volunteer deputy registrars here in Travis County. We're very proud of what we've done here. We're proud that we have the highest voter registration rate of any urban county in Texas. And we really want to lead the way and encourage your members and other people in other counties to kind of follow some of the things that we're doing here in Travis County. And we just hope to plant some voter registration bluebonnets around the state and hope they sprout.
You know, I got 2 t-shirt ideas listening to you speak. I think we could have a voter engagement army t-shirt, and I think we could have a I'm a Texas Bluebonnet VDR engagement t-shirt. So, you know, get ready. I might be improving your wardrobe in the near future.
I love that. Matt, write those down.
I'm doing that right now.
Yeah, those are great. Those could be great t-shirts.
I think so too. Well, gentlemen, I don't see any other questions either in the chat or the Q&A. Katie, am I overlooking anything? Or Joyce, do either one of you see anything I'm not seeing?
No, no questions.
All right, if not, we will go ahead and close out the meeting. Matt and Bruce, again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you attending today. I know it was a little bit challenging and we all had to pivot from being in person to doing this virtually, but I'm glad that you were able to make it today, and I appreciate everyone who stayed around and got their registration. We'll go ahead and leave live just for the last couple of minutes so folks can click on these links. But otherwise, I think unless there are any other questions or chats that come through, we will declare this meeting concluded for the day. Everybody get out and enjoy the sunshine and have a great rest of your Sunday. Thanks so much.